Hi there. Welcome to Bourbon Turntable. This is the show that blends the love of music with the love of whiskey. Tonight we have really eh, one of my favorite guests that we have on the show is Lenny Eckstein from Deerhammer Distilling out in Colorado. Lenny, welcome back to Bourbon Turntable.
Thanks, Kevin. It's always awesome
Yeah,
to be on here.
yeah.
Big fan of the show, so it's fun to be back.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's very humbling to hear. But we've got a lot to go through tonight. So,
That is true.
but it'll be fun. We'll get as far into it as we can, but want to make sure that we really honor Lenny and what he's doing, and we'll get into that in a minute. I need to tell you guys about some things first. First of all, Barcart Co-op is a collection of friends who produce content for the whiskey enthusiasts. We have shows like Distiller's Talk with Alan Bishop and Christy Atkinson. Alan and Christy will talk with distillers from across the country and around the world about anything and everything in terms of distillation. I think Lenny's been on there a time or two himself. Alan also has a show called One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute. If you're a distiller, you got a question, send it to Alan. He'll post a video response and we can all learn from your curiosity. Alan also does a show, If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. In the show, he departs from the whiskey world and gets into the paranormal, the spiritual, the unusual. It'll cover everything from Bigfoot to the alignment of the stars to you name it. It gets into a lot of cool things. It's a very interesting show. My Whiskey Den with Pat and Mike and Mitch airs Monday night live, 9 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Central. My Whiskey Den is where craft whiskey is king. I believe Lenny's been on that show a time or two as well.
Yes.
And lastly, Whiskey in My Wedding Ring with David Levine. David is an excellent writer. He posts a blog where he does reviews of whiskeys, and he does a podcast where he will interview distillers. So be sure to check that out. And of course, there's our little show here. If you're watching us right now on YouTube, kindly hit the subscribe button so you can make sure you catch all of our shows. You can also catch us on your favorite podcast platforms. So, Lenny, once again, thank you for being on again. This is always a lot of fun to talk with you. And one of the things that's always impressed me about you, and this goes before I had this show, when I was just listening to you on Bourbon Daily and other such programs, is you'll try just about anything in what you do. And so how did you kind of develop that philosophy or that reputation as a distiller?
Well, I guess part of it started, in advance of actually the production side and diving into any kind of, coloring outside lines. It was with the philosophy of like, one of our taglines is steeped in tradition, crafting Colorado. And it might not mean that much, it's marketing, but the steeped in tradition part, that's a nod to, so much time spent studying fermentation and all facets of grain and beverage alcohol production and these things that I find fascinating. I think everybody does, most people, and really admiring how things are done in the traditional sense. And then realizing there's a lot more room beyond the confines of tradition. And, big brands kind of move slow, like a ship that's slow to turn. And being smaller, there was room to be more nimble. So, not necessarily by design initially, but pretty early on at Deerhammer, our production system and really capacity was that of, one batch a day, one barrel a day. So, grain in about 1,300 pounds or so of grain that gets milled that day goes in and gets mashed and gets fermented and gets double pot distilled and fills one single barrel. And I was really happy that that's where, the pieces fell, because that lends itself to, not that every batch is going to be an experiment, but any batch can be. And, I've really taken the approach of, there's an example of something I sent you or maybe a couple that I've sent you that we'll be talking about and tasting tonight, that are just slight variations of what our standard batch profile might be, but whether it was intentional or driven pragmatically because we might have run out of a certain grain, there was always the example to say like, or a chance to say, let's see where this goes. Let's take notes on the barrel, and in 4 years, let's see what we're doing. And that's kind of the impetus behind it. That, and habitual just fuckery. It's fun to do the same damn thing every day. It gets boring. So it's fun to mix it up. There's all sorts of places to play.
I love it. And you've been at this since 2010, I believe, right?
Yeah, I mean that's when we technically like founded Deerhammer in terms of committed to making it happen. And what I like to kind of reminisce about is 2010 is when I started telling everybody, because if I didn't tell everyone I knew, I felt like I had a way out. But once I said it, I was like, I gotta go now.
Now you got to do it.
Yeah.
You're pot committed at that point. Or
yeah, but the very first distillation, I want to say it was like early 2010 that we like technically founded Deerhammer. And my very first distillation with the TTP issued distilled spirit plant license and everything was in late 2011.
Okay.
And been a wild ride since then.
Yeah. So 15-year anniversary next year. Anything special planned for that?
Maybe. I mean, it gives me enough runway to plan. At least every year, I'm like, God dog, we should have done something, but we didn't. So maybe next year. I've got some ideas. We'll see.
Yeah. Now, the roots of Deerhammer, as it were, are in American single malt. What made you choose that as being the flagship of your distillery?
Well, thankfully, I guess in a sense, I didn't know any better. Had I, it would have been like a high rye bourbon for sake of sales. But my passion was behind working with the grain and the recipes that I was most comfortable with, and coming, from a trajectory of more of a beer tradition, working with malted barley and some of those, modified malts, that kilned and roasted malts. I found so much room and opportunity to play around. And I think that was, I feel like that was just inevitable, because that was the comfort zone. Everything else, I was like, ugh, like I hear rye's tricky. We'll see. Where single malt, I knew I could do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's start there. I have four Deerhammer American single malts here. Well, it's one is the base malt only.
Yeah.
And one is a standard expression single barrel. One is an Albarino finish, and one is a Solara barrel. Yeah. Very cool. All right. So where should we start?
Well, why don't we start with the standard? I'm trying to remember how I labeled it. I have bottles like
standard expression single barrel.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
And and when I say standard expression, I was trying to figure out how to pull off side by side, since so many of them are pulled straight from a barrel.
Yeah.
This, as I'm calling it, standard expression. It's our most it's truest to the core, our standard recipe, but this is a single barrel. This was a single barrel pick from the Nebraska Corn Alliance liquor stores, of which there are, I want to say, like 6 or 8 members of small independent retailers that band together to buy and share single barrels amongst themselves, that better buying power. And they picked this one fairly recently. I think they still have some on the shelves throughout Omaha, and I think they might have location in Lincoln. But yeah, I guess like just a baseline discussion of what our single malt is, and what single malt is in general. As some listeners might or might not know, the government is still dragging their feet on making this an official category.
This has been a year and a half, right? A year and a half since they put out
like 6 years. It's been crazy.
Well, the actual prototype or draft of the requirements has been out for, I thought it came out last summer.
Yeah, I think you're right about that.
But you're right. They've been talking about it for years, though. Yeah.
I guess I should say, and I'm going to get the dates wrong, since the formation of, all the American single malt producers in this country, of which there's more than 200, I can't keep track. There was an effort, and thankful for the leadership of that group to, more or less petition the government, say, hey guys, come on. Like, we're all doing this. We're doing the single malt comes out of tons of countries, obviously Scotland and Ireland and Japan, and for God's sakes, like Tasmania and South Africa and Israel.
Yeah.
And we're doing it too. So single malt in its most simplistic sense of the rules that are being proposed would have to be 100% malted barley made at one distillery in this country. And there's some other rules, but that's the gist of it. So ours is 100% malted barley, but worth noting about this one as our core standard expression, albeit a single barrel, is that it's about 80% two-row pale malt. Two-row, I guess, like would be in contrast to six-row malt barley. Two-row has less potential for enzymatic conversion, which would be very necessary for bourbon production if you needed those enzymes, but it's got kind of a better flavor in a sense. So we're going for flavor. Two-row, and then the other 20% after the first 80% two-row is a blend of dark roast chocolate malt, Crystal 45 and Crystal 120, and it's aged minimum 4 years in heavy toast char 2.
Okay, so new use barrels.
Yeah, in the case of this one, absolutely. That's our standard. Yeah,
I think. I've had more than a handful of Deerhammer single malt single barrels, and I think this is a pretty fair example of what you do.
Yeah. I mean, baking spice notes are a big hallmark of everything we do. A little bit of chocolate and coffee mixed in.
Yep. A little hazelnut, a little oatmeal cookie, maybe.
Yep.
This has
the confectionery notes that come out from a lot of places, but one place in particular, the use of yeast in this one, we lean on a strain known as M1, which is a pretty common yeast used in malt whiskey production, but I find that it lends a big kind of like cookie icing confectionery note. And I like how this plays with single malt a lot. That yeast does, rather.
Yeah. So, no, that's very good. If you're in Nebraska, find this. You will enjoy it. This is fantastic. So where would you like to go next?
Oh, let's see. How about let's go to the one that's the base malt only. If I label it that way.
Yeah, you did.
This is one that I almost had to skip out on. To the tune of like we can produce a barrel and just write a little note on there and stash it away for 4 to however many years. I stumbled upon this one. I think I knew that we made it. I can't remember 4 years ago. I mean, but I saw it and I was like, "Ooh, how awesome!" Like, because we're at a point where nothing comes out of the barrel under 4 years. That's our baseline minimum. And an American single malt of just base malt is not uncommon at all, but it's super common at Deerhammer, where like that would just be not enough room to play around with. So it's neat to find.
So when you're saying base malt only, where the other one was 80%, the two row, right? And so this is going to be 100% that.
Yep, 100% two row malt barley, grown and malted in Colorado, and curious to see what you think. I just find it interesting. I almost couldn't find it. I just found it right before I hopped on with you. But it's kind of neat. It's just different. We usually
that is different. That is, I mean, it's very good, but it's very different. I get a little more honey on this. Yeah. But don't get the hazelnut, don't get the chocolate. Oh wow. It's like a different expressions of honey, like honey graham crackers, and then just fresh clove honey, a little bit of fruit.
Some slight green notes. It's
I like that.
It's an interesting one. It's I like it too. I think but it's what's interesting about it. It's when we first started producing an American single malt, I had more than one distillery comment that, the use of that kilned and roasted malt seemed kind of, to like no good reason for it in terms of flavor contribution. And I always was pretty steadfast in that it would make a big impact. It just, give it some time and let's see what happens. And let's do a side by side. So
yeah,
that's what we're doing right now. I think
yeah,
this malt's cool, but let's throw some extra flavor in there.
yeah. So yeah, side by side, I think this is very interesting. It shows that the impact of the other 20% and how much that contributes to the flavor of this single malt. And this one that's the base malt only, what do you do with those? Are those single barrels? You're going to blend them into something, or what do you think?
It is a single barrel. I don't know that we have any other expressions that are base malt only. So to the point of blended in something, I would say either yes to that frankly, it could go into an American single malt as a standard expression. If we're to pull between 8 and 10 barrels, it's going to balance itself out. But it could be a single barrel pick. It could go into a more unique expression that's not our American single malt, or it might be a distillery only bottling. That's the fun thing about having a tasting room is we can put fun stuff out that way.
I think that blending it into something else would kind of be a waste. Because this is too good, and for people that are fans of Deerhammer, that would be a coveted item just to do what we're doing right now, taste things side by side.
Yeah, it's a good call. I hadn't put thought into exactly what to do with it as much as like, holy crap, let's see what this tastes like. So.
I can consult out for you, Lenny.
You're hired.
All right, so we've got the Albarino finish and the Solera barrel project left on the single malt. What do you think?
Let's jump to the Albarino finish.
All
right. So this one also, actually, we just shipped this out last week. Also a single barrel pick out of Omaha, Nebraska. This one was selected by the Library Pub, which is a phenomenal bourbon bar or across the board whiskey bar. Just outside of downtown Omaha, and I couldn't be more stoked that they picked one of our barrels.
That's awesome.
And I'm actually heading out there. Let's see, it's Whiskey Wednesday, so the first Wednesday of December. I'm heading out there for an event to do, like pour all our stuff for everyone and talk about this one. So I'm pretty excited.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
How far is Omaha from you?
Out, man. Like easy 9 hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Nah. All downhill.
You just coast.
Yeah.
Get in your wagon and coast.
Yeah. So this one, it's our a standard American single malt expression that we put into a second fill ex-Albarino wine barrel. And while I'm not the most, the biggest expert in all things wine, I'll spare you the backstory. But my understanding of Albarino, I was looking for a finish for a previous project that was, a drier white wine. And I expressed to this winery, how about something like a Sauvignon Blanc? And they're like, how about Albarino? I was like, never heard of it, but let me try some first, like what came out of the barrel, and then, we'll go from there. And it was exactly what I was looking for in terms of the flavor profile. And this being the second fill of that barrel, or I guess technically a third fill because wine went into it, then single malt that came out, and then more single malt went in.
Interesting.
But yeah, just some different notes, some like dry fruit stuff going on.
I don't get as much of it. Kind of mutes the chocolate a bit, and I agree. There's some dried fruit stuff going on in there, maybe like a dried apricot.
That's a great call. I was gonna say like maybe that, like a little bit of honeysuckle kind of.
No, it's very good. I like that a lot.
Again, like just kind of trying to ping pong around with like all the different directions that our American single malt could go in, but I think it's like just a super versatile style because, certainly any whiskey could have all these treatments and variability in its grain bill or finishing. But, bourbon in its purest sense is exactly that. And anything else requires disclosure of, was it finished in a sherry barrel? Was it finished in a rum barrel? Was it, what was blended, from different producers? And that is one of the things that initially I had a little bit of pushback on American single malt being permissible to not only go into used oak, but any used oak without the disclosure of what it was. And once, the wires connected and I realized what kind of freedom that allowed for, it means that, in any American single malt expression, I don't have to pull from just our core that we started with. We can weave in some other flavors if we want and not have to update the label every time. So
that's kind of I like that. I like that. But I do like knowing. I mean, I get you don't want to have to burden somebody with having to change the label up, but it would be nice to have access to that information, even if it's just online.
Yeah, that's a great call. And someday I would love to motivate to have an ongoing, serialized batch release, speaking to the barrels that were pulled, and if there was anything unique about them, which typically there aren't in our standard batches, but if it ever makes sense.
Yeah, I know that Adam over at I'm drawing a blank. What's it called?
Monroe.
Yes, Old Monroe now. Yeah. He at one point had all of his single barrel releases lined out on his website, so you could go in and you could see, and it would tell you the whole backstory. And
that's awesome.
I loved what he was doing with that. And they've got some great things going on with their new visitor center and tasting room. It looks like it's coming along well.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of what they're doing, and I do need to get back out there. It's been a few years. I've been following them online, but I love what they're making, and cool spot.
All right, so we've got the Confluence Reserve Solera Barrel Project. So this is ages 4 to 7 years. So tell us what's going on here.
I'll find my sample in a second. Doesn't matter. Is this it? Oh, here we go. Yeah. So I had this idea a while back that I wanted to put a product together that was, the confluence being like where two rivers or more come together. I like the idea of multiple whiskeys being, like married together in intentional proportions that maybe stays consistent and goes into maybe a sherry barrel or something. And, years kept going by and I realized it wasn't happening. But I did also realize, and this kind of goes back to what I was speaking to before, there's so much flexibility in American single malt with regards to finishes. So I have all these projects kicking around. Maybe it's time to put those together. And it slowly is morphing into what I wanted to do for that initial kind of concept of a confluence of multiple things, multiple streams. So while this is 100% American single malt, there's a lot of ways to structure a Solera system, but oftentimes in the most traditional sense, it would be a pyramid of barrels, and you're drawing down and drawing down from one row essentially. And as that's drawn down, you drop some from the row previous, and you're ultimately putting the youngest stuff in the top, and it's intermingling with the oldest stuff. Super cool. And my current distiller mentioned to me that he was like, "Hey man, why don't we do a Solera system?" And I was like, "Yeah, that'd be awesome, but where? Like, I can't fit it in our rack house as it currently is, and can't just stick them outside." So, not having room for what would be pretty badass to have a traditional like pyramidal, Solera system, I went with 4 hogsheads that are about 70 gallons each. And what I'm doing a little differently and more in a rudimentary level is I started with a base blend of what I found to taste really nice together. And that was comprised of some older American single malt that we had kicking around that I just didn't want to have go to nowhere or just blend into a standard batch. Some American single malt that we put through a process that we refer to as super sour mash. It's kind of paramount to kettle souring, where you extend
Yeah.
your mash to introduce more lactobacillus and organic acids. And that barrel was pretty phenomenal. A rum barrel finish. And at this point, what I'm doing is drawing down per project, like going on a little bit of a tangent, but something I found in the market lately is that single barrels are not as easy to sell as they used to be, because liquor stores are sitting around time. Inventory is a big commitment.
Right.
But what is easy to sell, or easier, I should say, is a partial single barrel or half single barrel.
Yeah.
So this is one where I think, like, if this hits the right note for someone, pulling off, 25 gallons to do a partial single barrel works. And then I can top that back up with another 25 gallons of something interesting. So, whether it's a modified Solara or a glorified Infinity Barrels project, it's a neat way to keep a blend going with interesting additions.
Yeah. So, what were the original use of those hogshead barrels then, or those new barrels as well?
Petit Verdot wine that had, so it still has a little bit of fruit character, but they've been used multiple times for other projects before. I was like, what, like, I can use these for this project now. Still imparting some fruit for sure. I should say, though, a portion of what is in here is some port finish single malt as well, which I'm sure you passed.
That was the first thing that I noticed, was it tasted like your port finish.
I should clarify. I want to say that's like at least 35, if not 45%.
Yeah.
My notes have gotten kind of crappy on this project.
It's the port finish, and if you, that's a picture, or my picture of a bottle of the port finish. It's bold. It's got a very bold flavor to it. The not just the, but a lot of times a port finish will overpower whatever the liquid is, but that's not the case with the way you do it. It's very deftly handled, and the port enhances with that fruit, with those fruit notes, but you can still taste that base American single malt. All those key tasting notes still come through, but that port finish, that fruitiness, is kind of an addition to it.
Yeah, that's been a fun one. It's a lot of people recognize single malt, not necessarily American single malt, but single malt in general, from what they know of products out of Europe, Scotland primarily.
Right.
And there's a lot of delicate single malts out there, which are phenomenal, but the potential to be like smashed by port or sherry is high. So they have to go pretty delicate. I think that's a luxury that we have at Deerhammer, is in making an American single malt that's like bold in itself and has such prominent chocolate, coffee notes, such big baking spice notes, that the fruit, intermingles pretty well, and you can let it go pretty strong and still hold up. And I've had a lot of fun with that, like kind of challenging that side of what the balance could be.
Yeah, no, it rocks. It is absolutely on point. And again, this Solara barrel project is interesting in that it's kind of bringing together, to use your word on this little bottle, confluence. It's kind of bringing together a lot of the different things that you do with single malt into one. And I think that if you're somebody that is new to a Deerhammer single malt, it's a good place to start. Or if you've already started, it's a good thing to try, again, side by side with your standard expression single malt and the port finish single malt. And then this, I think you kind of get, you kind of climb the scale, so to speak, in the single malt world.
Yeah, I like how you put it that way. That makes sense. And I should qualify. This one, for the most part, is not available to purchase in its current iteration. However, it has been. Our friend Steve Akeley at the ABV Barrel Shop, he had a portion of this. I don't think they have any left at this point. But also, what's fun for me about this project is it's evolving. So if anyone did score a barrel at that time, barrel pick from them that was a portion of that. It's not going to be the same.
It won't be right
next time it comes around. So, but I like the idea of getting out there, and I'm trying to figure out the best mechanism for release, whether it's, partial picks or tasting room or limited releases in some capacity. Yeah, because it's just shy of 300 proof gallons of on rotation. So
yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, no, it's good. So one thing that you had not typically done in the past, at least I believe you'd not, was submit whiskeys to award shows or award programs.
Yes.
But this year, I know you did.
I caved.
So, so what led to your decision to change that up?
Well, maybe about a year and a half, 2 years ago, we decided that as we were landing on the place we wanted to land with our whiskey in terms of like the evolution of where we started and where it's landed. I mean, it's always a work in progress. I'm always,
sure,
even now I'm switching over to bourbon production and I'm tweaking things right before we start. So every year is always a little different, but we landed on a place where I'm like, you know what? I feel I'm confident, content, and all those things with the whiskey we have. It's all minimum 4 years old now. And we have enough. So let's, spread our wings a little. We're not going to be in all the states, but we can get out of Colorado. And while my initial head in the clouds idea was, how about we go to all the markets that are warm? So in the winter, I could go traveling to, San Diego and Florida and New Orleans and Hawaii would be rad. I realized real quick that's not how it works. And what has been great for us is the Midwest. I mean, it's one state over for the most part in terms of we're in Kansas, we're in Nebraska, we're in Missouri, like these, and the enthusiasm for all things whiskey, bourbon, all of it, and craft whiskey and Colorado whiskey. I mean, the reception's been fantastic. I'm sorry, I totally lost track of your question. I didn't. What was it initially? Oh, awards. That's right. Thank you. Yeah. I'm going to bring this around to an answer. Thank you. So as we started looking to move into these states, and we were meeting with new distributors for the first time in over 10 years, we quickly got the question of okay, great. We're excited to bring your stuff on and just let us know, what awards you've won this past year. And I was like, well, we don't do that, man. That's
right.
There's nothing wrong with it, but I'd rather make whiskey and not pay $400 or so per bottle to send it in to have somebody tell me what they think of it. And the reality is I have no problem with that format. I just, we don't have the biggest marketing budget, and of the marketing budget we do have, most of it goes to me making stickers, and I can make a lot of stickers for the entry cost of one bottle. But I started to realize real quickly that when I explained to one distributor that competitions didn't make a lot of sense and I didn't want to do that, they gave me a look like they smelled a fart. And I just I realized I had to change my attitude on that pretty quick. So it was an instance of when keeping it real goes wrong. And last year I was like, you know what, why not? I'm going to send some stuff in. So try to stick to the ones that people pay attention to: San Francisco Spirit Awards, the Ascot Awards. And it went all right. It went pretty well. They
double platinum in Ascot. That's pretty solid.
You know what I liked about that one? If I get speak to that one, at least for a little bit, that was, me sending in our product and saying I hope it does well. I like our single malt, but American single malt is a broad category, and there's not a definitive criteria. There's no calibrator. How does a judge know what an American single malt should taste like? Should it taste like, Springbank or Glenlivet, or should it taste like, Stranahan's, which is one of the OGs in single malt, or St. George Spirits, or McCarthy's. So I'm sending it in just thinking we'll see what they think. Well, what I like about it is I like when I like winning. That's cool. But it went to best in category finalist alongside Cedar Ridge, who,
Yeah.
those guys are doing phenomenal stuff. And
Yeah.
when I saw that, first of all, that's a huge honor to be neck and neck with Cedar Ridge in any conversation, in any matter. And then what I like about, I think there's some room for some things to happen in the spirit competitions that could make them more interesting. But what I like that the Ascots does is they did stream their best in category finalist decision, and that was fun to watch. And while the nod went to Cedar Ridge, and I can't be mad at that, I liked hearing what the judges had to say. And, one judge said about Cedar Ridge, I really like how the aroma, flavor, and finish are like clear in terms of what I'm getting. Like what I smell is what I taste, and what I get on the finish.
Right.
And another judge, to me, I was like, oh, that is cool, but that's not what I strive for.
Right.
I strive for uniqueness in that, and that doesn't make one right or wrong. So it was just cool to hear the sentiment of those, tasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's very subjective. I mean, because some people, it's very simple tasting notes if the nose, the taste, and the finish are basically the same. But I kind of like it when it shakes it up a little bit as you go along, and it's kind of a journey.
Yeah, I should qualify. I don't believe that to be true about Cedar Ridge's American Single Malt. I think it's phenomenal and complex. And I mean, there's only there's plenty of single malts that I hold in very high regard, but there's only a few that I'd be stoked to lose to.
Yeah,
in a sense, that's
sure.
a great one.
Well, I mean, double platinum is not losing necessarily.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a huge honor. And for the record, my whiskey of the year last year was your Progeny.
That was a fun one.
Yeah,
cool.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
It just blew my mind.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about hickory smoke corn whiskey.
Yeah.
Because this is you said you're steeped in tradition, crafted in Colorado. I believe that this is a completely Colorado sourced product. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's this corn is grown at Ute Mountain Farm. That is kind of, for those familiar with Colorado or whatever, just looking at a map, it's kind of like the Four Corners area where Colorado hits those other three states. It's at kind of near Cortez. It's it's a food grade corn. It's non-GMO. It's grown on a reservation that's been growing this corn for a long time. Mm-hmm. And when they realized, like, hey, we grow pretty good corn, let's start marketing it. And there's a lot of in fact, we just took a delivery of a silo full earlier today. It's just, it kind of goes to the mindset of, we could use the same corn that other distilleries are sourcing their corn from throughout the Midwest or wherever it's grown or whatever commodity supplier might supply it. But I don't know, like, it's not, again, like, there needs to be more, everything has to be fun or there's no point in it. And part of that is sourcing, where we get the product from. I love dealing with this company and the people and having a different base, be it for, in our hickory smoke corn whiskey, that's 100% of the grain bill is this corn, or our bourbon leverages this corn as well.
Yeah.
100% Colorado grown yellow corn.
Yeah.
We cold smoke 10% of the grain with hickory for a long time. It's about 8 hours of letting it kind of kiss the smoke as it pipes in and out the top of the smoke chamber. Yeah. When
I talk to people about corn whiskey, this is top of the list as far as things I need to try. We've got the ex American single malt barrel, and we have the ex bourbon barrel. Where should we start?
I guess let's start with the ex single malt barrel. That is in a sense, a truer expression of our standard offering of hickory smoked corn whiskey, albeit this one came straight out of the barrel and is proofed as such. I should mention for the most part, all of our barrels go in at 105 proof, so lower barrel entry proof. It means a lot of things, but this one also, what's a little different is typically we do go into ex bourbon barrels of our own production. But this one went to an ex single malt barrel.
That's very good. It's a little bit more of the smoke than what I get when it's out of the bourbon barrel.
Yeah, yeah, and also like variable on the age. Like as it sits, the smoke kind of dissipates a bit. So at 3 years, I can't remember if we ever had this discussion before, but a funny impetus or origin on our hickory smoke corn whiskey. This came about as a an idea of forever ago. When we first started, there was a very small market for unaged whiskey, or white whiskey, as a few of us were calling it for a second.
Mm-hmm.
And the thought was like, well, hey, there's unaged rum and unaged tequila. Certainly, there could be unaged whiskey made from grain,
right?
Or an unaged product made from grain, and nobody really cared. And there was this guy Rory, who used to be one of the owners of Peach Street Distillery in Colorado. He somewhat famously once said, when somebody asked, what's a good use for this unaged white whiskey, he was like, you put it in a fucking barrel. And at the time, I was like, come on, man. But he was right. The best thing to do is just like, we were making unaged American single malt, and a better channel for that, rather than trying to push a rock uphill and say like, come on, bartenders, don't you think this would be great in a cocktail? Even though it was.
Yeah.
It would be easier just to put in a barrel and wait 4 years. So back to the corn whiskey, the idea was like, well, what can we do to replace this quick to bottle product and still have a whiskey? And I started like scratching my head, and I thought, I bet I could make a compelling corn whiskey that within like 8 to 12 months is viable. And that's what I did. And I did find it to be viable, but some of it, after it went like 2 to 3 years, got even more viable.
Yeah.
So, now we're at a minimum 3 years on our hickory smoked corn whiskey. And that's what we just tried, was something that we might very likely pull for our next batch when we marry them together. And then the next one is the very first barrel that gave me that, what should be obvious to most people, but a realization to me that it should be older.
Yeah.
And there's still some in that barrel. So that's it's now a 6-year barrel, and it's my favorite one.
But before we hop to that, I get like tobacco and some cinnamon, almost like red pepper flake, and some citrus. It's like there's a lemon bar cake with a really bad attitude.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. It's
sort of also, you clued me into something that I don't always pick up on it, or wouldn't have necessarily otherwise, but it almost also reminds me of like an old fashioned that a bartender might kind of like flame the expressed orange peel as they squeeze it in it.
Yeah.
Yes, just for a second, it picks up some of that.
Yeah.
And some buttery notes in there as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so the side by side will be fascinating, because just going by
that as well.
Taste memory, this is very different than what I have in my bourbon cabinet.
Yeah.
Okay. And so this is aged in an ex-bourbon barrel for 6 years.
Yes.
Now, you're typically, like if you go online to deerhammer.com and you order a bottle of the hickory smoked corn whiskey, what's the age going to be on that? Is that going to be 3 years? Is that going to be what?
It depends where you order it from. And, as you and listeners are probably aware, we don't have the luxury. I mean, most states don't have luxury. Kentucky, New York, I don't know. I can't remember which states do permit their distilleries to ship out of state direct to consumers. In Colorado, we don't. So anything online, I'm not sending myself.
Right.
So as a result, if you were to get one, it's most of the time going to come from California, and in which case it would be a 3-year expression. If you order it from Sealbox, if they still have it in stock, kind of an interesting coincidence of sorts. The one that we're tasting now, the 6-year, that was a partial barrel pull of that one a year and a half ago. So it's
Oh,
slightly
really?
younger, but it's this exact one, proof down a bit, if I remember right. I want to say it's about 100 proof is the offering they sell. So sealbox.com is a good way to get the
Yep.
one we're about to try.
I am just pulling it up, and it does appear to still be there. It says the proof is 84 proof. Is that?
Could be wrong or could be right. I'm wrong most of the time. So I could have sworn I sent like 100 proof, but
Yeah.
this time's the setup with these systems. I didn't set it up, and even if I did, I could have made that mistake. So
Yeah.
I can't promise that it's not 84, but
Yeah.
it might be 100.
Yeah.
I can promise it came out of this barrel, though.
Out of your on your website, it says 84 proof.
Our standard expression is 84 proof.
Okay.
Yeah. The seal box expression is pretty sure it's 100.
I'll quit treating this like a presidential debate and fact checking it.
You fact check. I just don't have good answers.
You have a concept of a plan, so
yeah, exactly.
All right, last political joke of the night. Wow. Yeah, that is very, very different.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the demon in this other one's been exercised.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as a negative thing, because I think the other one is lots of fun. But again, the point is we're trying experimental things. We're trying things side by side just to see the results of your experiment.
Yeah, and to that point, I was listening to one of the recent Bourbon Turntable episodes, and you had Maggie Kimbrell on, and she made a really interesting point that I've been thinking about a lot, and I don't know that I agree or disagree, but it's a valid point, which was that if I represent this right, that in a smaller distillery that experiments habitually, the downside of that is that what happens in 5 years when you realize something really is a banger, and you can't have that again for 5 more years. Well, I guess I do agree with her. She's spot on. Like, that is an absolute fact. But where I'm okay with that is I've got a favorite barrel of everything in this rack house right now.
Yeah.
And I'm not, maybe I'll have a new favorite in a few years, but I guess more to the point, I think for a small distillery that is not looking to conquer the US or the globe in terms of getting their product out there and having something consistent, there's an absolute truth to, experimentation isn't always replicable, but the beautiful part of experimentation and it not being replicable is I get to be on this journey, and so does everyone else with us and every other small distillery.
Right.
And what if somebody gets a theoretical pour of this older hickory smoked corn whiskey from Sealbox that might be 100 proof? Maybe that's their favorite expression of our hickory smoked corn whiskey ever, and they never find it again. Or maybe they do. Maybe in 2 years there's another one. It's just that variability is a circumstance of a small independent distillery doing their thing, having fun with it, and really going on a journey of, stuff that I might have been timid about putting out because I knew it was going to be better in the future, but it still had merit at the time, to where we are now, which is to say, I'm really happy with everything we make, but I still think it's going to be better and more compelling in another 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's the journey of it all.
Yeah. Well, you're learning things, what works really well and what doesn't.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't necessarily have the luxury of, okay, well, this barrel turned out to be a real skunk. I can't blend it in with 150 other barrels and make my small batch whiskey like, Heaven Hill would do. But you're still learning from, if something doesn't go exactly the way you want it to, you're still learning from that and being able to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, and if anybody comes to visit our distillery and comes to the tasting room this summer, and we have a rye chai liqueur made with 7-year-old rye, I can tell you why it's in there. It tastes good, but that's what happens when you make an experiment and your 7-year-old rye tastes a lot like coffee and not a lot like rye. You gotta, sometimes you gotta swing and miss a little to bring it back. And I don't know. Again, as I mentioned earlier, if it's not fun, I'm not doing it. And these experiments and these like variations of a stand, it's not easy to make whiskey, but it's not hard to make a whiskey that conforms to the hallmarks of a style. We all know what the grain bills are and the processes are. We've all been on these distillery tours. We know what the machine looks like.
Right.
But if you're wired the way a lot of us are as craft distillers, that's cool. And I drink a lot of it, but I want to do something else.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. This with this bottles that I have already with the corn whiskey, I usually get kind of a buttered popcorn note. This is more of like you're grilling the corn and buttering it right on the grill.
Yeah.
Because that smoke is still there. It's not as forceful a punch as it was with this 3-year-old in this single malt barrel. It's kind of a more mature, more refined version of it. And yeah, that's very interesting. I don't get as much citrus on this as I do on the other, either this or the regular corn whiskey. But
this one's just a lot basier.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a weird one because like we've got a few barrels that every once in a while there's so little left in the barrel that I think to myself, like, did I sample that much over the years? Like, what is going on here? And I mean, also we do lose a bonkers amount of angel share, and also barrels leak a lot here because it's so dry. It's just hard to keep that from happening. But this one's pretty low, and short of somebody saying like whatever's in there, I don't care, I'll take it.
Yep.
Good chance it's just going to hang out in this rack house for years. Whenever somebody comes to visit, we might draw a tiny sample and sip on it and see how it's progressing. So, it's a fun one.
Yeah.
Like it.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, because that is fun. It's a lot of fun. So I've thought a little bit about what if Deerhammer were a band, and I've got a couple of thoughts on that. How about you? If somebody said to say, what band or musician would you say would best exemplify Deerhammer? What would you say?
Well, before I say it, and there's probably a few that I could kind of put in this category, I would say that album to album, you'd have to say like, what is going on here? Like, I guess I'm listening to the same band, but it's the kind of, discography where you listen to it and you're like, wow, they would not stop on one style. So one band that conforms to that I've been listening to lately, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
I've heard of them, yes.
Yeah, that would be one for sure. Actually, one of our distributor sales reps in Omaha turned me on to these guys, and they've been around for a while. I've kind of heard of them, but I never really gave them much listen.
Yep.
And I started listening. I was like, God, these guys are interesting. And like, it's just, that kind of like left to center, always catching you off guard. And that's, I guess, like, I like that idea of, I like to take inspiration from everywhere. And in music, it comes from a lot. So that's one. I'd welcome any theories or parallels you find.
Yeah, there were a couple. One was Primus.
Oh yeah,
because this is the way we're going to do this, and that's just it. We're going to do this the way we want to do it. There's always the nod towards the history. They've done tours where they've played entire Rush albums from beginning to end. Yeah. But it's also, we're also going to do this our way. And you can call it a whole lot of things, but you're never going to call it boring or the similar to anybody else.
Yes. Yeah, unmistakably, like you could hear like 4 seconds of almost any song. Like I know who that is, and that
Yes.
having a DNA baked in is
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And the other I thought of was David Bowie.
Yeah.
In that,
Interesting.
because he's kind of like, I can do this exactly how I want to and be the best. I can also do it exactly how you would do it and be the best.
Yes.
Because he has stuff that is a little more commercial, and like, hey, I can do a bourbon, hey, I can do a rye, and it's gonna be great. Or I can do some offbeat American single malt or some twist on a corn whiskey, and that's gonna be great too. And if you're a fan of it, you're a fan of it. But it's never boring.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting thing, and it's also an interesting thing to, like you can't. I feel like one can't disconnect the music from the persona in that area of artistic expression.
Right.
But in a lot of this, like I think, I don't know. I mean, in a sense, some of my personality is infused, but the whiskey and me are very, in a sense, very different. I mean, it's an expression, but it stands on its own. That's not necessarily me. Like where it's words and sound is coming out of a person.
But
yeah,
your personality doesn't appear to be one that just tries to play it safe.
Yeah,
that certainly comes out in how you distill and what you put in barrels.
I think that's one of the coolest things about the conversation of we all talk about terroir and taste of place, but my favorite realignment of that is like more provenance and taste of the people behind it and what they bring to that. So again, I guess I'm like kind of saying the same thing, but contradicting in a sense. It's like that the persona has to come through in some way and make an expression of, well, why did that group or person put together this grain bill or decide to go in that direction or run their still this way or make the cuts this way? Like, why did the sensibilities come to be the way they were? I think that's a fascinating thing in whiskey, be it for ourselves or for me to appreciate anyone else's product.
Yeah. And like you made the point with Primus that you hear 3 seconds of the song, and most of the time you're going to know exactly who it is. And I think that holds true for you. The DNA of what you do, it's pretty identifiable, even with all the nuance and the changes and the journey that you take it on. There's still that Deerhammer DNA that still comes through.
Yeah, that's definitely the goal. And again, I said before, but that's what keeps it fun. It's the idea of being mistaken for another product, that would be devastating.
Is this Blanton's? Is this Blanton's?
No. Yeah. Yeah.
I couldn't. No. We're winning over Blanton's drinkers is what we're going to do. So we've also got your 4-grain bourbon.
Yeah.
And this is, I was very excited about this because the mash bill, which I think is a little different than your standard 4-grain mash bill anyway, for the high wheat is 68 corn, 18 wheat, 9 oats, and 5% malt. And then you've got a high oat one, which basically flips the malt and wheat content.
Yep.
And so I was very interested to see what this would be like. So
and before we jump into it, Kevin, tell me if I'm right about this. In 2020, when we were all, the whole country / world was trying to figure out how we're gonna talk to each other, we started using computer screens. And I did an event with the ABV Network crew, and it was kind of like, we were winging it a little, but myself and a former production manager, my buddy Nick, we did an event with them and said, how about this? We're gonna like go through and kind of do like somewhat of a like virtual barrel tasting. We're going to describe to you what we got going on. And in that, after that, rather, we sent out to, I think, all the participants examples of whiskey that was 6 months old, and it was these two expression, not these exact barrels, but
Right.
the high oat and the high wheat. Were you involved in that?
Yes, I
call?
was.
Okay.
Yes, I was.
A long time ago.
Yes.
These are that, not the exact barrels that I might have pulled as samples, but that exact generation of production could very well be the exact same barrels. So that year we did an experiment of our bourbon that is typically a higher oat content 4-grain bourbon, and as you pointed out, flip-flopped the wheat and the oat. So one was higher wheat, and then the other generation of that year was higher oat.
Right. Same 4 grains, and the only difference is the flip-flopping the grain content of the wheat and the oat. So which one would you like to start with, the high wheat or the high oat?
Your call. There, I don't think one's, I've
got wheat. I've got the high wheat one in my glass. So we'll start there.
And a couple things I'll point out about this one as you're getting into it. You spoke to the grain bill, other aspects of the production process. Again, sour mash, a minimum 4-day open air ferment, double pot still distillation on traditional pot stills, no plates, no column, none of that. Mm-hmm. We proof down to 105 before going into full-size independent stave barrels that are all heavy toast char number 2 for at least 4 years. So these are like 4 years and 2 months at this point. And something else that's unique about these, and we're about to change just to see what happens, is these also use M1 yeast, which is stereotypically a malt yeast, but that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean it has to be used for malt. You could use it for beer, or you could probably make bread with it if you wanted to. But yeast has the ability to potentially be very impactful, or it could be nothing. It could be a neutral yeast, not really do much. This yeast lends a lot of baking spice confectionery notes. It does not accentuate fruit notes typically. And we're also experimenting probably in the next week or two, we're going to start a bourbon production season using Firm Solutions traditional bourbon yeast and see how drastic of a difference that is.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
But this is about the grain bills side to side. So,
but so is the both of these use the same M1 yeast?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes. So similar, but we get to see what a slight difference in grain percentage does.
Yeah, this is, you talk about the confectionery notes. This really has it. There's a definite, I don't know, frosted cupcake kind of thing to it, or maybe some sort of like a pavlova. But there's like some sorghum going on in there too.
Yep.
A little bit of maybe pecan, like a candied pecan note.
Yeah, and as much as I think this does, especially in a side by side with a more archetypal Kentucky bourbon, the night and day difference in one that really showcases some fruit notes and this one, unmistakable night and day difference. But I do like the bacon spice character, and dare I say, maybe some marzipan in this.
Okay, yeah. Well, if you won an Ascot Award, so you have to use marzipan as a tasting note at least once a quarter. Yeah, I think that's required. Okay, so I'm switching over to the high oat.
And it's interesting. You spoke to something before, to some extent, with regards to when we were talking about experimentation. You don't know right away. You need some years, and oftentimes in distilling and maybe on the marketing side, but it's not obvious. But folks will say, as soon as I tasted that White Dog coming off the still, I knew. Kinda, I can tell when the cuts are right, but I can't tell what it's going to develop into by any means. And in 6 months, it starts to show you something, and in 2 years it shows you a little more, but in 4 years it really shows you where you're going. And
Yeah.
then in five, I would say in our Colorado climate where we're at 8,000 feet, I really do think that like 4 to 5 years is a sweet spot. 6 years, it starts to lose a lot of the characteristics that I like a lot, and kind of, some of the subtlety of the grain character starts to scrub out. So,
Yeah.
It takes a while to know. And this was, it was that experiment that early on, I thought that I really wanted to do a higher oat content, significantly higher. And I played around a little. We did some, but really, I think I like the grain bill we've settled on. That is actually like slightly higher in wheat these days, but still substantial in oats. So.
Yeah, I think the difference between the two, and we're talking about going from 18 to 9 to 9 to 18 between the two. The difference between the two is striking.
Yeah.
I get a little more like a hazelnut note on the oat, a high oat.
Yeah. I think oats are an interesting one because we're not used to that flavor in our whiskey or bourbon, and it certainly has historical precedent in its use in Irish whiskey way back in the day, and even still, there's other distilleries, big and small, messing around with oats, and not for no good reason. It's a very compelling grain. It lends, in addition to a lot of flavor, it lends a different texture.
Yes.
I think pot still distillation in itself will lend a different textural component with a whiskey from start to finish. But oats, it's a whole nother world.
Yeah.
And
I think this is creamier
yeah.
than the wheat. They're both very good. I find, again, this point of this is it's a side by side. I think the higher wheat, I like it better overall.
Yeah.
But I'll like the nuance and the difference and the kind of the change of pace in the high oat. I think you got winners with both. And again, the point is you've learned something about how these two grain builds will interact with your process and with your aging.
Yeah, and really, like, from the beginning, we looked at this experiment as, well, worst case, we're going to blend these together and come out with what would have been the amalgamation of sorts of, like, a grain bill that balanced them anyway. But now we don't have to. And we sold again also in Nebraska, which is I love the folks in Nebraska. Big Deerhammer fans out there. One of the wall-to-wall wine and spirits in Lincoln bought a single barrel of the high wheat bourbon that just came of age that hit 4 years. I think it's some really cool stuff. I guess to the point of what you're saying, I find the higher oat content really compelling, and a big part of me loves like the punk rock approach to being like, just flipping the bird and being like, nah, this is what we're doing. But also, it's not just for me. And like, I'm okay with meeting people where they're at to some extent. So, that's where trying a seasoned production with a more stereotypical bourbon yeast comes into play.
Right.
And will we release some of that exclusively with that, from that production year? Probably. But the reality is we'll probably blend it with then some 5-year or 6-year whiskey that was made with the M1 yeast. So it's all about finding the flavors we want. And I really like having the tools. And again, like, those experiments we do might not be replicable, but as long as I'm at the helm, I'm going to keep doing it this way.
Yeah. And it's, this will be a horrible analogy, but I'm going to go with it anyway. It's like you've got the expressions that you produce that people love and want to marry, and then you kind of have the expressions that this is kind of my girlfriend on the side.
Okay, that's not a terrible analogy. I get it.
Not that we're encouraging anything like that, but if you go down the line with your core expressions and just what you might pick up at a liquor store in Omaha, Nebraska, for example, or that you might order online, you fall in love with those. But then if you get the opportunity to try the things where you're throwing a curveball into it, and that's fun. I think that's a lot of fun, and it's exciting to try something different, especially if you're really into the whole process and you want to see like what we're doing tonight. I want to try it like this, and then I want to try this one as well.
Yeah. I mean, where I really like where you're going with this is that, and it's something I think about a lot, whether it be, a really cool bourbon bar or, someone's home cabinet of, variety of whiskeys and bourbons. I don't know that there's a fatigue for the most standard styles of bourbon. I can't get enough of them, but sometimes, whether it's me or I have a friend over, or I wander into a bar, more often than not, when I go into a bar with a great selection, I like to ask the bartender, like, what do I need to try? What's different? Yeah. And I think there's so much room for deviation from the standard profile. And whether that's, something like, off the cuff, like Hidden Barn, that is for the most part, or the complete part, Kentucky bourbons at this point that are, super pot distilled and grain forward and have all kinds of character, or, coming back to Colorado, some of the bourbons that will catch you off guard. If a bartender, if one was to roll into a bar and say, like, well, what's different? What should I try? Maybe they pull a bottle of, Leopold Brothers bourbon that was finished in their 3-chamber still rye barrels, or maybe they pull a bottle of 291 that is aspen, wood infused, or maybe they pull a bottle of Deerhammer that would completely, flip the style on its head and has all these bacon spice notes and doesn't have fruit notes. There's a lot of fun in what's different, what's out there. What do I need to try?
Right. So. And there's nothing wrong if I love Weller. Okay, great. You love Weller. Sure. But you don't need to eat just vanilla ice cream.
Right.
You don't need to eat just, cheese pizza from Papa John's. There's a whole world out there. And that's part of what you cater to is
that's where we live. Yeah.
The part of the world that makes it interesting.
Yeah. And just one last riff on that. I'm not going to get ice cream and then going back for seconds. And I'm not going for pizza and then ordering from another pizza place. But if I'm going to pour myself a drink, it's typically going to be a 1 ounce pour at a bourbon bar or less at my own home or a friend's house.
Yeah.
I'm going to try at least 3 things, ideally, if I, have the capacity to do so. So I think that's a really fun, I'm stating the obvious, but that's a very fun experience within appreciation of distilled, matured spirits, bourbon, whiskey in general. Yeah. And again, that is where Deerhammer lives, is like, whoa, what am I tasting? This is so different.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yeah. And it's not just, there are a lot of things that are different.
Yeah. Sure.
It's different and it's good. It will challenge if you're not tried it before, it will challenge your palate in ways that you may not be expecting. But give that second, third taste a minute and you'll see, okay, this is, we're getting this some very interesting stuff here. This is not typical Kentucky bourbon. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It's fantastic, but you're not going to do the same things that they're going to be doing down at, Wild Turkey or Buffalo Trace.
And that reminds me of a fairly recent circumstance. I was at a liquor store in Missouri, and I was pouring our lineup, and this older gentleman came up to me and he goes, "Son, I'm from Kentucky. Pour me your bourbon." And I was like, all right. And as I'm trying to give him the quick primer on, just so you know, it's not going to, he takes a sip and he goes, "Ha, you got a lot to learn." And I was like, which immediately, if he wasn't, I don't know, at first I wanted to fight him. Then the second thing I want this. So what I actually said to him, I was like, you're comparing a hamburger to a chicken sandwich. I was like, we're not doing the same things. And he kind of sat there and stared at me, and he started laughing. He was like, you're right. He's like, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm not saying I'm making product that would, blows everything out of the water. I'm saying we're doing our damn thing. It's got validity. Let's broaden our horizons and try these styles. And, see what's out
there. Let's try some rye. How about that? We've got a couple of ryes here. One is the 36-hour kettle sour, which we'll let you explain, and the standard batch. So let's try the standard batch first, and then then we'll let you explain what the 36-hour kettle sour means.
Yeah, and I should say, what was kind of fun about pulling these samples. So the standard batch, I don't know how many barrels they're still there. Actually, they're just to my right, but I pulled all of the rye barrels that I felt like pulling out. There were some others hidden, but all that would have been, appropriate for our next harvest of rye batch 11 or 12. And I don't think this is that unusual, but I guess like in talking about like the philosophy of like how I would put together a blend, I do like broad brushstrokes is as I describe it is, I dip a long tube into the barrel and take a quick sip and spit it out. And I go through every barrel and I'll write some notes. Usually it's aroma and flavor, just real quick stuff. And I'll qualify some barrels as like kind of like our base barrels. Like they meet all the standards that I'm looking for in our whiskey, in this case, the rye. There's nothing highly exceptional about them or nothing off profile about them, but this will be the core of what our barrel blends are made up of. And then there's a few that I'm like, holy hell, this will blend nice into these.
Yep.
And then I try like, 10 or so blends. So that was a long way of saying what you're tasting now is like the base. It's not necessarily the full blend, but it's the core of what our standard barrels taste like.
Yeah. This is a little more citrus than I recall from your rye.
Yeah, like I mean, and citrus can go in some different directions. So you start with citrus. Personal subjectiveness is I get often, maybe my mind just goes to this, but like those like powdered lemon cookies.
Yes.
It's almost like that kind of citrus, but
yes.
it can vary barrel to barrel also.
No, I get that. I get that. A little bit of vanilla in it.
Yep.
Some tobacco in it.
Yeah, and I should mention grain bill wise, it's Elben rye, which is a varietal that's not the most commonly used in rye, but it does grow well in Colorado in the San Luis Valley, which is about an hour and a half from here. So that's a flavor that is somewhat unique. Interestingly, Storm King Distillery in Montrose, Colorado, also uses Elben rye, and I had the opportunity to taste one of theirs that was 100% rye, and it was awesome to try because I've never done that. And it's got hallmarks of this, but it also has more bubblegum notes.
Yeah.
That was friggin' cool.
Yeah. No, that's a cool note. I like finding that note in a whiskey.
Yeah.
But this is if I'm remembering right, you're 70-80% on the rye content, and then
that's right, 70%. Yep, I totally dropped off on describing the grain bill. So it's approximately 70% rye, 20% oats, 10% specialty malt, and that specialty malt will often most years be a blend of light crystal malt, so crystal 45, which imparts a bit of a honey note, and chocolate malt, which per namesake imparts like kind of a chocolate coffee note.
As your rye ages, how do you see, and this may be difficult to answer because there may not be a lot of continuity to it, but as your rye ages, how do you see the taste profile changing or maturing?
Well, I guess that's an interesting question. I've been paying closest attention to our older rye. I think that one of the things that makes that question hard to answer is that we have not sat still with our recipe and processes with the rye. And as I alluded to earlier, our oldest rye At best, there are a few barrels I'm like, whoa, this is some nice seasoning. And I've done some blind tastes where a small percentage, like, I don't know, I'll say like 5% of 7-year rye mixed with the majority of 4-year-old rye is better. I didn't want to dupe myself into thinking it's better, but when I do it blind, I'm like, this is better. And then when I blind others, and they think so too. That's a long way of saying that our first year rye production, it's 7 years old now, but it's not on profile for what I actually wanted.
Yeah.
And then that was our first year. Our second year was closer. Our third year was closest. And a lot of the rye that people have tasted over the past few years has been our third year rye production. But now we're getting into some of the newer stuff. And again, like, I'm pulling 4-year barrels, but they are better than our 5, 6, and 7-year barrels because, frankly, we've nailed it. And that's not unique to craft distilleries. When people say like, oh my God, this 10-year stuff is amazing, not that I have much 10-year stuff, but some do. I tend to think that a lot of the, distillers or owners of those facilities would say like, yeah, it's good, but if you tasted what we're making today at 10 years, it would blow the socks off that. And God, it is a convoluted answer to your question, but I guess I would say that I think we really nailed our rye now. Like, what has been put out over the last year is where I was going. And I would say so much to the extent that I'm not even messing with the recipe anymore. I think it's pretty money. It's not, I like what the yeast does with this one. I like the barrel profile does. I'm happy with all of it. And I would say that even our 2 to 3 year rye is fantastic. And, I don't know that it'll be any better than what I'm bottling. Actually, they're bottling downstairs right now. But yeah, that was kind of a long-winded way of saying like the rye as it ages, it also evolved. So
I'll go back. I've got a bottle of your rye that from maybe a couple years ago. So when I tried this tonight, it's different. There's probably more, for lack of a better phrase, flavor drift on the rye that I've tasted tonight as any of the other expressions. We're doing a side by side tonight, but that's not. I'm not going to stop with that. I'm going to go back and compare it to some of the other things that I've got hanging around. But yeah, this is very good. This is very good, and I think won gold at the Ascots. There you go.
Yeah, that was a cool one. I like the tasting notes they had for that. It really, because again, this is not a typical rye. Like you, in a lineup of, be it, what we all know had been historically the mainstay rye, came out of Indiana from MGP. It's never getting mistaken for that. And it's not going to get mistaken for independent producers that are making it either. It's very different. So I liked what they had to say about it in terms of like, I do think there's like a deep, rich darkness to it that's different. And, I like that they picked up on that. So I don't know. It's cool. Competitions or whatever. It's fun to get the feedback. I don't always enter them, but it's kind of a thing now. So maybe we'll see what happens next year. Maybe we'll take a year off and get back to it. I don't know.
So the other sample of the rye that you sent was described as 36-hour kettle sour. So talk about that.
So, we don't really talk about that or implement or use that term in distilling very often. We talk about like sour mash, and that's like a process. But in breweries, if they want to make a sour beer, one method for doing so without like inoculating in unintentionally inoculating your entire brewery with bacteria that you wouldn't want to linger otherwise is to do a mash where typically a malt barley or if you're adding some adjunct grains like rye or corn or whatever, you're going to mash in the 150s, 150 Fahrenheit, give or take, maybe 154, 155, depending on the residual sugars that you're looking for. And in describing it kind of simply and crudely, the process of a sour mash would be you drop that temperature to about 100 and hold it there, where at that temperature you're not going to kill off any bacteria that might settle in.
Right.
And the most prominent bacteria on that hangs out on grain and is on everything is lactobacillus, and you can let that sit for 24 hours or 48 hours or longer. You're running, I wouldn't say risks, but you're doing different things when you're letting that hang out as opposed to the yeast hang out. But you can bring it back up to temp and kill off that lacto at that stage, so it's not active anymore. Cool down to yeast pitching temps of maybe your yeast pitching temp is in the 60s or 70s. In our case, we pitch at 70 Fahrenheit, so we cool it back down.
Yeah,
bring it up, cool it down, then pitch our yeast. And then we go for a 7-day ferment, I believe was the case in this one. It can vary a day or two, plus or minus. So we're getting these, if you've tasted a sour beer, be it kettle soured or otherwise, it's a lower pH, it's acidic, it's sour. Those acids that form those flavors in the beer do the same thing in a distiller's beer, but do different things when you distill it over and let it sit in time in the barrel, and they oxidize and they develop into new flavors. So it's like, I don't know, that's like a clunky way of saying like we're throwing another flavor agent at a product that wouldn't otherwise have those aspects necessarily, and they don't come out right away. I mean, you can taste it a little bit in side by side and unaged distillate, but you can taste it a lot more after like 3 to 4 years in the barrel when it has that time to oxidize and develop those flavors.
Yeah. This is an enhanced citrus lemony note.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's where the result of that sour or not, but it's definitely there.
Yeah. I get like, I've done this on different batches, and I've done it on our single malt, and I kind of alluded to that earlier, that is in the confluence reserve, or that. Sorry, in the rye, in both of them, I definitely I get some buttery notes up front that are more predominant in this than the other ones, and then I get some like different kind of fruit notes. In the single malt, it was like this weird papaya quality. This one's a little different though. It's it's like. Again, like the more lemon.
Yeah. No, this is a lot of fun.
Something I love about this one, but it bums me out also. Of the various blends I did for our most recent batch of rye, I did not want to put this barrel in there because my thought was like, no way, this is going to hang out and I'm going to let people try it and I'm going to, it'll be cool to see how it keeps developing. But it went into blend D, and blindly I thought that it was my favorite, but I didn't know it. I thought it was our previous batch. Once I realized, shoot, this barrel is making this batch really good, I harvested it. So anyone who gets our next batch of rye is going to get some of it.
Well, that's the downside, I guess, to doing so many different experimental batches is you'll find things that you fall in love with that you just want to kind of keep over in the corner.
I mean, my job's to make the best whiskey I can. And when it comes down to it, like those goofy things I get to keep to myself and geek out about. Yeah, if it works out, cool. But otherwise, I got to make the best products I can. And in this case, the one we're tasting, it went into the next batch because it's awesome. It really lends some nice quality.
It really is. It's fantastic.
I'm glad you know.
And again, very different than I would be very interested to find somebody that says, I don't like rye.
Yeah.
And let them try this, because this is not what they would be expecting, I don't think.
Yeah. It's that is, when I go to any of the markets that we're in the Midwest, and I'm sure we'll expand a little bit beyond that, I love going to these bourbon festivals and pouring our product and talking to people about it, because while I have some great folks that can do it for me, I love exactly what you just said. When folks come up and they're like, I don't really like rye, I'm like, how about this? Try it. You can spit it out. Just don't spit it at me. And, and more of every once in a while, like, nah, I don't like it. Cool, fair enough.
Yeah.
Thanks for trying. But usually people are like, whoa, that's different. You're
Yeah.
right. Holy hell.
Yeah. I mean, overall, gosh, if we go back, you know, you were talking about that tasting event with ABV Network 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and where things are now. There's a lot more complexity to what you've got. There's um, the the fruit notes come out a lot more, um, and it's fun to see how you've kind of played off of yourself, really, uh, to create some very unique things. So maybe you're jazz. Maybe
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
maybe you're jazz. I don't know.
It's
This
definitely
is
something with a progression, and
yeah,
like a slow progression. And, whether it's like on some levels, I love it. On others, I wish I could hit fast forward, but we don't have that luxury. So we got to
yeah,
see, like, maybe it's like, on that music analogy, it's
yeah,
like the next album, though, like wait till you see
yes.
what drops.
It's you got to enjoy the journey of it,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
I greatly appreciate the fact that you shared this stuff tonight and let me kind of uh, have an experience of a part of that journey, because that's, to me, that's what this is.
It is. And whether it's like, the willingness for whether it be you or anyone who's an enthusiast of like whiskey and bourbon and all that, that's what I implore everyone is like, go on that journey with craft distillers that are doing
Yep.
the damn thing. And
Yep.
not all craft distillers, I mean, this isn't a knock, but not all of them are looking for an evolution. And that's not only okay, but appreciate what they're doing also because they found their voice.
Right.
But for those of us that are like, unquestionably on this journey, come on this journey with us. It's fun.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. It is fun.
What's the worst case? You spend $50 on the bottle and it's not your favorite. So what? You
Right.
spent $50 on way stupider shit.
That's for darn sure.
Yeah.
All right. Lenny, I've kept you for about an hour and a half now, so let's we can wrap this thing up. And we made it through every bottle, every sample that you sent, and I feel kind of a sense of accomplishment for that.
Yeah.
And
Me too. Because truth be told, I haven't really had anything to drink in 3 weeks, and I don't really recommend that to anyone. I thought it was super boring, but it's a long story. I actually, I'll fill you on the backstory later. But it's yeah, it was really nice to have a few sips tonight. So,
yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Well, I love what you're doing. I appreciate the work that you and your team at Deerhammer are putting in. It's an incredible contribution to American whiskey, and
Thanks, man.
I
That
think
means a lot.
you've been a trailblazer on the American single malt side, and I think that what you're doing with all of your other expressions are, man, it's just so good, so good, so unique. You're just charting new ground, and I think that's to be commended. So
Thanks,
congratulations.
Yeah, I mean, I've I kind of said it before, but I think there's some amazing stuff happening in landscape, and I am always inspired by what everyone else is doing. And if anything I do lends inspiration to anyone else, whether it be on the distilling side or anywhere else, that's all the reward.
Yeah.
So that's
Very
what we're
cool.
doing.
Very cool. All right. Well, where can people find Deerhammer?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm as per usual, or maybe it ebbs and flows, but I've been pretty slacker on social media lately. But at Deerhammer on the Instagram, Facebook, sometimes X, wherever else. And we've really enjoyed over the, since 2012 when we opened our tasting room. It's been a really fun thing to expose people to how we make whiskey on the small scale, 1 barrel a day.
Yeah.
And we get to share that with people, be sometimes distilling single barrels or making cocktails or pairing food with our whiskey. We recently shut our tasting room down for a few months to reconfigure some things and really like amp up the level of experience as it relates to whiskey and the whiskey we make. So we're reopening our tasting room. We're targeting February. And I should say, if there's anybody out there, bartenders, anybody who is looking to make a move to Colorado and live in the mountains and work for a really cool small distillery, probably hire you. So you can find, again, at Deerhammer, and anybody, anytime, reach out to me, Lenny at deerhammer.com, and come see us. We're in Buena Vista, Colorado. It's a really cool spot.
Very cool. And tasting room opens back up in February, so that'll be fun.
Yep.
15th anniversary next year, so that'll be fun. So probably next we'll have you on certainly again at least once next year to talk about
that'd be great.
What else is going on and 15th anniversary and all that cool stuff. But so be sure to check out Lenny. Follow him on Instagram at Deerhammer. Follow him on Facebook, Deerhammer Distilling Company. Go to the website, deerhammer.com. You can find out a lot of details about their different expressions, about their history. You can order from there. Again, Lenny said, don't necessarily ship from there, but you can order from there. You can also go to sealbox.com. Right now, looks like they have corn whiskey, 4-grain bourbon. They think they've got looks like they've got a private selection Sealbox pick there. Port cask finishes there. American single malt is there. So a lot of really good choices. All of them under $60. So check that out. That is a great way to dive in and to try a few things. Look, order 2 or 3 bottles. It's going to be less than what you're going to spend on some of the nonsense that you would spend it on anyway. So it'd be great. And I think very good autumn whiskeys. A lot of your stuff I'll definitely gravitate to around Thanksgiving, because I think a lot of those tasting notes, a lot of those flavors pair really well with everything that you're doing with Thanksgiving dinner.
I couldn't agree more.
As for our show, you can watch us on YouTube and listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. We have a Facebook page where we post all of our shows, including this one. We have a Facebook group where you can jump in and see what we're drinking, what we're listening to while we're drinking it. I got a feeling pretty soon I'm going to be drinking some Deerhammer on the patio and listening to some Primus. So anyway, Lenny, thanks again for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Wish you the very best, and a little bit early, but happy holidays to you and your family.
Likewise. You as well.
And on behalf of Lenny and myself, until next time, cheers, love, and Freebird.
Awesome. See you guys.